37. The fish die and the net breaks. Close-range aerial encounters are contingent. In many cases, the situation of the battle is not determined by the angle or position of the two sides, but depends on who can see the opponent first. Of course, there are no absolutes. On the surface, Goya's team has 8 pairs of eyes to search the airspace, while Hassan's 2 F-16C-shaped fighters have only 2 pilots, and the single-seater pilot must worry about driving and look down every half-minute. A basic instrument and an electronic tactical threat display, MPCD, so the 2 F-16s seem to be at a disadvantage in the chaotic situation, but this time Hassan seemed to have some luck. He looked up and saw a lonely track in the sky turning. He was in a favorable azimuth on the right, and the other party obviously did not lower his height to conceal himself, nor did he see him. "Look, that Su-30 is up there," the major said over the radio. "But what about his wingman?" "The radar detected too," Rashid reminded. "I don't know, it's really a hassle. You cover a kilometer behind me and keep an eye out for your surroundings," said Hassan. "He may be a good pilot, brave and active, but he's never been sensitive enough to possible dangers, especially when he pounces on his prey. I think it's about 8 kilometers, I have to do it quietly." "You have to be careful, the backseat pilot is a trouble," the wingman reminded. Rashid was right. The Su-30 had a good view from the backseat. As long as the other party turned around frequently, he might also see the sneaky fighters following him. "You're right, I have to maintain my current height and hide in a blind spot." Hassan's plane also had 2 AIM-9M combat missiles. He bowed his head in the MPCD's attack options, selected 2 missiles, then turned on the warhead power, entered the automatic scanning mode of the seeker, and then pressed the seeker to cool down. This U.S-made missile requires cooling of the seeker head before an attack, and insufficient cooling could adversely affect an omnidirectional attack. When Hassan raised his head, the enemy plane was still moving north of the glacier, and his speed was slightly lower than his own. He followed carefully all the way, only waiting for the missile to find the target on its own, but the missile seeker was always in a ready state and could not find the target directly. The major was a little impatient, because he was hiding in the blind spot of the enemy plane at 6 o'clock. It is necessary to constantly raise the nose of the machine to align the infrared homing head guide ring with the target above. At the same time, it must be leveled frequently to prevent the height from rising too fast. Under such a laborious action, the speed of the F-16C is always around 400 knots. It is not easy to push the opponent. He knew that if he wanted to rely on the missile's own seeker's field of view to find the infrared heat source, he would have to track it all the way to within 2 kilometers. He was a little anxious, because there were a lot of lurking ground radars around the glacier, and they would start scanning this airspace from time to time, and with the early warning aircraft, it was only a matter of time before they revealed their whereabouts. Thinking of this, the captain put his hand on the radar switch. This is not a wise method. Turning on the radar will instantly remind the opponent of his position. The enemy is likely to react violently immediately to destroy the aiming, and may destroy others surrounding the enemy plane, and surface-to-air missiles were attracted, but he thought about it. If the enemy on the enemy plane is stupid enough, maybe it will take 10 seconds to check the position and make electronic contact, and then use 10 seconds to release a few groups of chaff or start electronic interference, and these redundant actions are ineffective for the Sidewinder. Enough time to complete the scan track launch step by itself. "Captain Falcon, we can't see you now," the early warning aircraft asked. "Tell me about your surroundings." "There is a maneuvering 2-coordinate search radar in the southeast. This is the latest discovery. Saab 2000 has been flying south, and occasionally new discoveries are made. This is probably a ground search radar that can be deployed maneuverably. This kind of radar that is turned on suddenly can sometimes fill the blind spot of long-distance early warning aircraft, which is quite threatening to the pilot who hides and seeks in the mountains." Falcon understands. The New discovery of the early warning aircraft increased Hassan's anxiety. He knew that in this dam control line, many people were killed because of indecision, so he had to make a decisive decision, and the major decided not to. After delaying time, he decisively used the radar to measure the enemy plane and helped the infrared missile to lock the opponent in advance, but he did not choose the traditional scanning and tracking mode. He thought that this would leave too much time for the opponent to react, so he had to limit the mechanical scanning radar to the left and right. After doing a futile sway on the sky, he took the risk of using the vertical scanning mode. In this mode, the radar will search for the target in a very narrow range, about 4 degrees, in the vertical direction. The advantage is that it is easier and faster to lock on the enemy. But this also means that if the enemy reacts in time, the chance of escaping the locked range will be slightly greater. But the major was quite sure of his flying skills. The moment the radar power was turned on, the enemy plane was moving slowly above the glass canopy. The major turned on the afterburner to increase the speed, and the engine speed increased suddenly. Within 5 seconds, the radar tracking will complete one-to-one tracking. The enemy plane in the 12 o'clock direction really began to maneuver, trying to escape the tracking, but did not wait for 10 seconds. It seems that the Indian pilot's vigilance was much higher than Hassan expected. The Su-30 began to dive down to increase its speed, which was within Hassan's expectations. He firmly placed the opponent in the narrow vertical search area, and the shooting factors such as the distance and angular velocity of the enemy aircraft were being measured. "Captain, there is an enemy radar scan at 4 o'clock, and the distance is very close," Rashid said. "You block them for me, I need a few more seconds," Hassan responded, ignoring Rashid's report for the time being. Ahmed Hassan served as Mohammad Sami's wingman in the 14th Squadron when he was young. During the Afghanistan War and the later India-Pakistan conflict, Sami's record skyrocketed, and his gains were always zero. In the past few years, in addition to learning a lot of air combat skills, he also learned the greed and impulsiveness of old Sami. "Captain, there are at least 2 enemy planes, and they have a height advantage 15 kilometers away." Rashid's panicked voice came from the radio, and it was obvious that Rashid had guessed that 15 kilometers away were not 2 meters. Grid 21, but 2 powerful Su-30 fighters. "Falcon 2, release electronic jamming, you have to lure them away," the major ordered. The enemy in front of Hassan was making a sharp turn while accelerating. He had never imagined that such a heavy aircraft could make such a sharp turn, almost out of his narrow radar search range. He already had a hunch that today would be very different from the usual easy sneak attack, and it was likely to be a situation where the fish died and the net broke.